let's go to, I think, the less naughty parts of this because you're really, which is the fact that there is plenty in the world that it happens today, regular people, ordinary people, that is simply not explicable in terms of materialism, that the people who've experienced these things are not always the obvious people, often the very unlikeliest people to experience these things. We had one on the show last week, Sebastian Younger, talking about near-death experience. It's a fascinating case. Again, someone who wasn't expecting this, who has been shaken to his core by an event that he did not seem to create himself. And I think you point out quite reasonably that in modern times, for example, not near-death experiences, we have many more accounts of this, partly because obviously our sciences allow people to come back, save people at the brink of death in ways we couldn't before. So in fact, and then you also say that there is a huge amount of evidence of things that happen, miracles of various kinds. There are various kinds of miracles, various kinds of experiences that suggest the numinous. And let's go through the three of them. One is you suddenly become aware of the whole and your oneness with it. I'm starting from the least ambitious in a word, that you become just somehow, something occurs, it happened to me once in college. I can't explain it. I was walking past a bunch of daffodils and I just got frozen and I felt infinity. I just felt I was part of infinity. I felt that everything had finally stopped, that it was something that I could not explain. And I saw it myself as evidence of what I already kind of believed, which might have been biased. But I definitely thought, wow, so this happens. It happens naturally. It happens also under the influence of some things like psilocybin, which also seems to provoke those parts of the brain. Then there are also moments when people seem to be aware of God specifically. And then there are points when you hear or see a specific voice, specific person that you really shouldn't. I'll tell you one example. My mother, a week before she died, saw my dad in the room. Yep. She told me it was absolutely real.
Yep.
She'd never said that before in the 4 years since he died. He showed up before she died. Now, I don't know what to do with that. I don't, but I'm prepared to give my mother the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
So why are we not aware?
As you should.
One should always give one's mother the benefit of the doubt. We're good Catholics. We know what to do with mothers. Look, why do we not know more about this?
Well, in part because it just, by its nature, does not fit into the way we sort of create knowledge in modern Western society, right? Which is ideally through the scientific method, which demands certain forms of reproducibility under laboratory conditions for, things that you want to state are absolutely fundamentally real, right? And, by its definition, supernatural, it's right there in the term, the supernatural are events that do not fit within the normal correspondence of atoms and cells operating in regular and material ways. So it's very hard to know how you would generate a kind of convincing double-blind controlled trial experiment for the tendency of people to have encounters with dead people either before they themselves die or when someone has recently passed. And there's tons of literature on this. There's William James and, the late Victorians got very into spiritual experience and, of course, ghosts and seances, right? And, went in for charlatans and so on in various ways, right? But also collected just a lot of anecdata, right, on how common it is for people to have to see things they should not see in situations where either they or someone else has just passed through or is about to pass through death. And there's a term one of the writers about this uses, hallucinations of the sane, that I think is kind of a useful way of describing this, right? Mm-hmm. So But so the materialist has to say that these are just hallucinations, right? That your mother had an hallucination, that anyone who sort of sees dead relatives, appearing to them in the week before they die, which happens all the time, by the way. If you read about like hospice nurses and people who are in conditions where death is coming to someone who's conscious of it, you get all kinds of reports of this, even before you get into near-death experiences, right? So the materialist has to say, well, something in the human mind is wired to hallucinate in these particular ways. It gets harder to explain when you have the cases where someone will, see a vision of someone who just died who they don't know has died, right? So then the materialist has to say, well, it's the law of large numbers. People have, various hallucinations over the course of their life, and they just remember the ones that seem timed for, somebody's death. Now, I mean, maybe. I've never had a hallucination of a person randomly. I've had various strange experiences in my life, but that hasn't happened to me. But you are dealing with a range of data that, on the one hand, I think has a real cumulative power. Like, this is just part of human existence that has to be explained under any reasonable theory of what's going on. But it's really hard. I mean, you could, I guess, you could set up some kind of laboratory setting, right, and try and corral everyone who has had any kind of contact with a dead person in this amount of time. But even then, you're relying on personal reports. You're not dealing. I mean, if these are visions that appear to people, you're not going to necessarily capture them on video, right?
Yes.
So that's
nor they like to be sitting in a laboratory being tested when it happens.
Exactly, and that's even more true once you get into, and I apologize for the the wildness of all this, but angels and demons and actual supernatural entities. Like, why would you imagine that a demon would submit itself to your double-blind controlled trial program to prove its existence, right?